What if I told you that one of the longest wars in human history was not fought because two kings hated each other, but because the entire medieval system of power was breaking down? The 100 Years' War, which lasted from 1337 to 1453, was not a single war, but a chain of conflicts that slowly destroyed feudal Europe and created the modern nation-state. It began with a succession crisis. In 1328, the French King Charles IV died without a son. Under normal circumstances, the throne would have passed to his closest male relative. That was Edward III of England, whose mother Isabella was the sister of the dead king. But the French nobility did not want a foreign ruler. They invoked a legal principle that later became known as Salic law, which said that women could not inherit the throne or pass claims through their bloodline. They chose Philip of Valois. Instead, Edward initially accepted Philip as king, but this was never truly settled. France held lands in southern England, and England held lands in France. Both kings claimed authority over these territories. France also supported Scotland, England's traditional enemy, in order to keep English power in check. Meanwhile, England depended heavily on the wool trade, with Flanders a region under French influence. By threatening that trade, France could strangle England economically. By the 1330s, both kingdoms were locked in a struggle over money, trade, and influence. Edward's claim to the French throne became a weapon in that struggle. In 1337, he declared himself the rightful king of France. War began. At the start, England was far weaker in population and wealth. France had almost 3 times as many people, but England had something new. The longbow. The longbow was a technological revolution. It could fire 10 arrows in the time it took a crossbow to fire 1. It could pierce armor. It turned ordinary peasants into deadly soldiers. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the French relied on heavily armored knights. They charged across open fields into a storm of arrows. Thousands were killed. It was one of the most devastating defeats in French history. 10 years later at Poitiers, the same thing happened again. The French king was captured and held for ransom. France was forced to give up large territories. The government nearly collapsed. It looked like England had won. But war is not decided by battles alone. It is decided by economics. France had more people, more farms, more cities. If it could survive, it could rebuild. Then disaster struck Europe. The Black Death killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population. Entire villages disappeared. Labor became scarce. Peasants began demanding wages. Feudalism began to crack. This changed the war. Kings needed money more than ever. They began collecting permanent taxes. They created standing armies instead of relying on feudal nobles. The modern state was beginning to form. France slowly reorganized. They stopped relying on knightly charges. They built infantry units and artillery. They adopted gunpowder weapons. England's advantage faded. In 1415, Henry V of England launched a new invasion. At Agincourt, English longbowmen once again annihilated a much larger French force. Henry conquered Normandy and forced the French king to recognize him as heir to the French throne. France was on the brink of extinction. Then something unexpected happened. In 1429, a teenage peasant girl named Joan of Arc claimed that God had commanded her to save France. She convinced the French court to let her lead troops. Against all odds, she lifted the siege of Orleans. Her victories electrified the French people. For the first time, France was no longer just a king's land. It was a nation. Joan was captured and executed, but her effect could not be undone. French armies became more professional. They used artillery to destroy English castles. They retook territory slowly but relentlessly. By 1453, England had lost almost everything in France. The war ended. England was financially ruined. Its monarchy collapsed into civil war. France emerged centralized and powerful. The 100 Years' War killed feudalism. It created national identity. It created modern government. It was the transition from the medieval world to the modern one. Welcome to Information Arbitrage. Outthink the crowd.